Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Planning Advisory Committee meeting for the town of Quispamsis, Tuesday, September 10th. With that being, we'll move on to item 2, approval of agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Mr. Preston.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the agenda with the one amendment that item C be moved, or 7C be moved prior to 7A.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder on that? Mark?
Second.
Thank you. Can we have a vote on that, please? That motion's carried unanimously. With that, we'll move on to item 3, disclosures of interest. None being, we'll move on to item 4, approval of previous minutes. Any adjustments to the previous minutes? None being, can I have a motion to approve, please? Kendall?
So moved.
Thank you. Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Can I have a vote, please? Motion's carried unanimously. With that being, we'll move on to item 5, business arising from previous minutes. Can I have a motion to receive and file? Brenda?
So moved.
Brent?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Can we have a vote on that, please? That motion's carried unanimously. With that being, move on to item 6, unfinished business. None being, we'll move on to item 7, new business. And with the adjustment, we'll move up to 167 Palmer Brook Road, which will become item A.
Hello.
Yep. So could you introduce your name, please?
So there's two of us here. I'm David Long. I'm the owner of 167 Palmer Brook Road, and I have my tenant on the line also, who is Darren Tisington, who will be occupying the space.
Okay, thank you. With that being, Jennifer, you want to introduce that topic for us?
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the committee members. We have received an application for development of 167 Palmer Brook Road. And part of that development, the request is for a discretionary use, that of fabrication, stone cutting and polishing of countertops. The bylaw does say that in an in a light industrial zone, that fabrication is a discretionary use and would need the approval of the PAC committee. There's going to be a dry stone cutting, which apparently has very low to no dust, and all of the waste is collected and taken off of site for disposal. Notifications were provided to landowners within 100 meters, and no concerns have been received to date. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mr. Long, you would have received the same package we did in the mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of PAC or the public asking you questions?
No, I don't think so. We will maintain a clean property. We have a number of properties in Quispamsis. We're lifelong residents. We believe this will have very little impact. It's all inside. It's really a storage of stone with very minimum work. The wet, just one second, I just got to switch my glasses. I'm sorry. All cutting and polishing is done wet with absolutely zero dust. So it maintains itself in a closed loop system. The actual fabrication of the stone, which maybe I was mistaken when I put fabrication there, is actually done on site of residences and apartment buildings. So there's going to be there's really no impact on the land or our neighbors around us.
Okay, thank you. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Brent?
Mr. Long, question for you. You just made reference to a storage shelter. Is it a building you're fabricating? Is it a building you're putting up, or is it a storage tent?
No, it's a 16. Sorry.
So basically,
it's a 16,000 square foot building is what we're putting up. The tenant's occupying part of that, and we're occupying the other part. We're owners of the window shop and design by, so we'll be storing windows and cabinets in one section, and our fabricator or our stone person is occupying the other part of the building.
So the storage facility he presently has at his current location is not coming to your property?
I don't understand the question again, sorry.
Sorry, the temporary facility he has at his current location is not coming to your property?
That is correct, it is not.
Thank you, Brent. Any other members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion forward or against with terms and conditions, please? Kendall.
I recommend that PAC approve the discretionary use under section 18B1A of zoning bylaw number 38, a stone cutting / polishing fabrication business at 167 Palmer Brook Road, PID 30346100, subject to the following terms and conditions. Number one, as per section 18J1 of zoning bylaw number 038, the applicant enter into a development agreement with the town, and two, a development and building permit. Development and building permits are issued by the town for the development and construction of the subject lot.
Thank you, Kendall. Can I have a seconder on that, please? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Brenda. Any debate in that motion? None being, we have a vote, please. That motion was carried unanimously. In 5 to 7 business days, you'll have a letter in the mail with the approval. Please work with the town to have all necessary documentation and the paperwork in place. Thank you very much, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and you don't have to stay online now. You can drop off if you wish. Leave that.
Okay, thank you
leave
very
that up
much.
to you. Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
With that being, we'll go back to the original 7A, which is actually 7B now, 258 Hampton Road. Could the applicant please come up to the podium? We'll get Dwight to introduce this item, then we'll let you guys introduce yourself. Go ahead, Dwight.
Chair, through you to the Planning Advisory Committee. This application comes to you through the clerk's office as part of a development agreement amendment. The property is located at 258 Pinewood, corner of Pinewood and Hampton, 258 Hampton Road, corner of Pinewood and Hampton. This is an amendment to a Section 59 agreement. Because it is going through an amendment to a Section 59 agreement, it requires the review of the Planning Advisory Committee, who will then provide their written comments back to the council prior to council making a decision. This particular development has come before Planning Advisory Committee on a couple of other occasions. As we're more than aware, there's a bit of a sort of history with this property, with the initial approval happening in 2020, and now we're into 2024, where there's been some changes in terms of the land ownership, in terms of the developers, but also in terms of the actual project of what's being proposed through this amendment. If PAC will recall, the initial development did have 3 buildings on site for a maximum of 100 units. Through a couple of iterations, there was an iteration that's seen that 3rd building removed, and it became a storage facility, as well as there were some amenities on the property in terms of pickleball courts, community garden, and a trail network on the property. This particular amendment looks to remove some of those amenities from the site, as well as this self-storage facility that was for the purpose of the residents that would be living in the buildings. That is being replaced with a third building. In terms of PAC, the amendment requires some variances to be considered by the Planning Advisory Committee. One of those is with respect to the parking. So the parking ratio has gone from what is required under the bylaw in terms of 1.5 down to 0.75. So this would still include, obviously, the underground parking that was part of the original proposal of the two buildings. There will be some additional parking space, obviously, associated with the third building. As I've indicated in my staff report to council, this is not something that's just sort of isolated to this particular project. This is a trend that we're seeing across the planning world, if you will. The idea of reducing the amount of parking spaces to lessen that sort of as a restriction. From a planning perspective, this is not a concern that would sort of put the brakes on the project, in that when we look at these types of developments, when people are going into these developments, or if you're downsizing, you're coming from single detached into this type of living, then there's obviously things that you need to consider. In terms of, if you have 3 vehicles, are you going to really need the 3 vehicles? You're going to have to change some lifestyles. So that is a particular item that we would be looking at in this particular item. And given the location, it is sort of in line with the municipal plan and strategic plan of creating, walkable community, being access to amenities. So when you look at the location, it is walking distance, obviously, of schools and churches, and then you get closer to the downtown sort of core area, if you will. So it's sort of that walking distance. We're also looking at for reduction in terms of the floor size for the 1-bedroom units. The zoning bylaw provides that there's what we call a bachelor apartment suite, which I think is 35 square meters, and then you have one unit was 41 square meters. So this particular request is sort of 37, which is almost sort of smack dab in the middle. So you're not looking at a significant reduction. You're looking at about 10%, which ultimately you don't think is a main concern when you're sort of you're not going below what was presented in the bylaw in terms of a livable space. You're sort of within that range. The other major item is with respect to the other variance. Before I get to that, is in terms of the lot frontage. The lot frontage, it's about 98 meters, I believe. So when you look at the overall occupancy in terms of the buildings, you're still only occupying about 22% of the lot. So that frontage provides sufficient area for the buildings, provides area for the access into the buildings, as well as the buffering. I did indicate there will be some initial buffering that will be required to mitigate the driveway relative to 254 Hampton Road. Again, that hasn't been sort of presented as this is what it's going to be, but it is an item that would be recognized and need to be addressed through this process to the satisfaction of the town. The other big element to note is obviously the increase in density. We're going from 100 units to 160. The way that's being achieved, obviously, is first with the bringing back, if you will, of the third building, but also reducing the floor space of some of those 1-bedroom units. When we look at the municipal plan says that in terms of density, we don't have a fixed density or a fixed ratio within our bylaw. The municipal plan basically says there's 5 elements that you look at. You look at, is it adjacent to a collector street? Is it able to support, does the building heights, sizes, parking, all those types of things, are they in line with the bylaw? Is the development overwhelming existing infrastructure? And if you're not being serviced by municipal water, then you have to do a hydrogeological study, which in this case, you're being serviced by both municipal water and sewer. And then the other items with respect to landscape and buffering, which when we look at the package as it's being presented, we feel that it does meet those particular elements, save only the exception of the 3 variances that are being asked through this amendment. I'll leave it there for now. I'm open to any questions, but there was also a planning rationale that was provided with the request that our applicants obviously would be able to refer to and present to the Planning Advisory Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dwight. Could you please state your name for the record, please?
Yep, sure. I'm Greg Zwicker. I'm a planner with ZAP. We were the applicant on behalf of Jonathan.
Jonathan?
Go ahead.
Rasenberg and Nathan Carter, my partner, who's here in the room.
Okay, perfect. You gentlemen would have received the same package we did in the mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of PAC or members of the public asking you questions?
We can clarify a couple of points. Since we were last year, we gave a presentation. We've seen the written submissions. We've gone to the abutting neighbors and had chats with most of the people abutting the property. We've also looked at the design a little bit. So we're moving toward a 1-to-1 parking ratio. We were earlier concerned that we couldn't get there. With underground in the first two buildings, we can get this to a 1-to-1 ratio now. So we can talk to Dwight about adjusting that in the application. We're comfortable that's achievable. Also starting to work with our civil engineer and our grading plan, looking at what we can do with the slopes around the site. Maybe put in a little retaining wall to hold up some of the slopes, therefore allowing more buffering or landscaping space around the edge. That comes with building permit and detailed design drawings, so we're not at that piece yet, but that's the goal. That's where we're trying to take it. The other piece, I guess, this changes really is that back building. We're trying to figure out what grade to set that at. It's only a 3-story, so similar to the housing behind, but where we have a hill, we think we can plane that hill a little bit and maybe bring it down so it's more of a 2.5 feel to the back, would be similar or lower than the properties to the rear of the site. So other than that, the plan generally looks the same as what was submitted, but as we move towards a detailed design and construction, those are the adjustments we're starting to make. But the 1-to-1 parking was the biggest one that we wanted to raise with you today.
Should I?
Okay, thank you.
We can flesh out a little bit more of
Go
the
ahead.
rationale too, if that's okay. So like I started looking at this site 10 years ago, like 2014. Where we are now compared to then is a very different situation on what's now affordable rent with construction costs being higher and interest rates being higher. And I've been doing more projects. We've got 108 units under construction right now, 54 in Rossay and 54 on the west side of St. John. As we've refined our building capacity, our pricing, our knowledge. What we're finding is we want to go to the original design had us, I think it was 20 some 3-bedroom units per site, and they were like a 1,400 square foot average. It's just not an achievable number to work with anymore to get reasonable rent. So that's part of it. It's not even just the ones. We're gonna have a lot less 3s and more 2-bed, 2-bath, 2-bed, 1-bath, 1-bed, 1-bath. It's gonna be we're gonna have a much more larger spectrum to have more still nice, pleasant, clean, safe, affordable units, but at different price points. And that's part of the rationale, because we're essentially adding 15 units to each of the larger buildings, but it's the same footprint that was approved before. And then getting that back unit without the underground parking allows us again to have still nice but more affordable units for more people. And by dropping that down, it's not much different than a 2.5-story building behind your house, which a lot of the houses surrounding it are that high and are at a higher elevation. So that I've also talked to most of the neighbors about whether they want a fence, don't want a fence, want trees, how much, so we feel like with some strategic landscape planning, we can try to keep as much of that older tree stock around the perimeter and around the back. I think it's important, and really try to minimize the overall disruption to neighbors, as well as so getting that in and then getting that unit, that third building at the back down at least a half a story is really going to help minimize, and that'll be our first building that we construct. It'll be done, finished, we're ready to start this fall on it, and then the other buildings will be in front of that and provide less disruption to the neighbors through the construction process.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Preston?
My question for the applicant is, increasing the density, obviously potentially it's gonna be 160 vehicles on site when you're at 100% occupancy. What's the implications to changing your entrance to Pinewood as opposed to Hampton Road, so that now you have now at least just controlled access onto the main road?
I mean, it could go there. The sight lines are the same either direction. It's a very similar spot. There's not a light at that one. It's a stop sign. So from that, it'll be similar in either location. What we can the argument around traffic is usually that the closer we bring this to schools and grocery stores and churches and amenities is better from a traffic perspective. We don't urbanize our core and bring people to the central area, they're leaving further out. And they're now all coming in and coming out. So the best thing we can do for traffic is bring some density into the core. So that's kind of the argument we put out there, is that it's better to be here than out there.
Yeah, I'm not questioning where the buildings are. I'm just saying you're gonna have a stop sign and then you're gonna have your entrance so many feet or meters away from that. At least with the stop sign, there's a controlled access onto the main road, right?
I think it was in the conversation too, is it was the way we had to go off the street. I don't think it matters much either way for us. It's wherever they want it. We haven't got to that level of design yet that it couldn't be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the bylaw, the municipal plan says the access is to be coming off of a collector or arterial, so the Hampton Roads collector. Plus coming off Pinewood, you're coming right into a curve. If I understand what you said, your question was, rather than driveway access on the Hampton driveway off to Pinewood, you're coming right out into a curve. And that just would be sort of more of a conflict than what this would be. We pulled, the access is pulled approximately 100 meters away from that particular intersection, right? So, which you wouldn't get coming onto Pinewood.
Thank you, Dwight. Any further questions from members of PAC to the applicant? Mr. Goslin?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you here. Was there a traffic study completed for this development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Goslin. There is a requirement in the development agreement that a traffic study be completed. To this stage, that traffic study has not been done. So it is a condition of obviously approvals and permits moving forward, but it is identified as a requirement.
Thank you. But the traffic study may dictate that a traffic light is needed, or maybe no traffic light is needed. Am I correct to say that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that it would be correct. Obviously, once the traffic study is done, whatever recommendations that would come out of that, we would have to look at implementing. That would probably reflect the actual build out. So there may not be any requirements with the first building, but as you get the full build out, those are the things that may be identified at this stage. So if those items, the traffic study is done and there's recommendations to mitigate traffic concerns, then obviously we would anticipate that would be something that would happen as the build out occurred, to give obviously time for that to be undertaken.
Thank you. My next question, Mr. Zwicker. What's the breakdown or ratio, like a 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or whatever, in an 160 unit there? What is the breakdown?
We haven't done it yet. It'll be approximately, off my memory, from what our first, it hasn't been designed. Our ambition is somewhere around like a third, a third, a third.
1/3 of 1 bedroom, 1/3 of 2 bedroom, 1/3 of 3 bedroom?
Minus a little bit, probably 10% 3 beds.
Okay.
Would be probably average, and then the rest of that would be around a third for each for the rest of it.
Okay, thank you. I got one more question, and if it's possible to show the slide of the development, not the building itself, but the development. Now, my question is for the back building at the back there, towards Pinewood, not Pinewood, P Drive. What is the setback at the right, the bottom corner of the building?
Bottom corner, the closest corner is around 25 meters off the line.
There's another slide that shows it pretty tight. I'm not sure if I can show this one.
Driveway's a bit closer, but the building is back.
Yeah, well, that's correct. Yeah, so
Page 5.
the one that shows all the trees and the driveway and the driveway behind the third building, and then it also show Peak Drive, and it looks like the setback is very small compared to what was agreed the last time we approved this development. And now we're talking about a 3-story building. The last time we spoke about was a storage building, right? Then we end up with 2 50-story building parallel. So, okay, okay, zoom in, please, yeah. Okay, where the parking is at the bottom there, what's the setback to the property line? Right there, yeah.
Parking corner, that's, I'd say it's about 15 feet off that. Right?
15?
For the parking.
This 15 from the parking pave area to the property line. So,
We could swing it up a little bit more to get it away from that line. Might be a good point.
well, I know the last time we had discussion about this development, one of the big concern was people living on Peak Drive and the setback. And if you recall, Mr. Rasenberg, we pushed the building back and then we put a storage building at the back too, instead of a 3-story or 4-story building that was originally planned in the first application, I believe it was. So I'm concerned that there be no buffering or very, very little bit buffering at that corner area. And then all the houses, plus we're talking about a 3-story building at this time, then,
So 2.5 practically, because
2.5,
it'll be
okay.
sunk in, and you know.
okay, let's take 5 feet off
In
then.
a pretty detailed level engineering to get the actual elevations all
Yeah.
nailed down, and even on that, like that is a.
No,
We haven't designed that corner and what that.
okay, but I'm expressing my concern based on the plan that's present in front of me.
Yeah.
I don't know what you have in your mind here, so I cannot read that, but I'm speaking on what I'm saying right now. And if you look at this plan, on the right-hand side at the bottom, there's all kinds of setback trees and green area. On the left-hand side, there's very minimal, and the people I'm sure there'd be a concern for the people living on P Drive.
That's a fair comment. I think we can look at that and we can bring that corner in. There's a lot of space between that driveway and the building.
Okay,
We can certainly pull it in.
that would be definitely a point that I would.
Buffer in that area.
It's a really nice natural tree line that's there, maybe with a little bit of infill, like a spruce or something like that, and potentially. I've talked to all the neighbors there around fence or no fence, like a privacy fence at the back. We're very open to it if they want it. So far it was 50-50, some want it, some don't, and then they were like, why don't you cut the trees down, then we'll decide. It depends how much buffer gets left there, and I think, as Greg's saying, we can keep a larger tree buffer at the back there.
That would be my recommendation for sure.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Any further questions from members of PAC to the applicant? Brenda?
Hi, a couple of quick questions. You're going to get another, or 160 parking spaces underground? Or just what percentage will be underground? Because you said you could do 1 and 1, so you need 160 spaces.
Each building gets 40 stalls underneath it, so 40 and 40, and then the rest are on the surface. First two
Okay,
buildings, 40
okay.
and 40.
So then the parking up top, right? You should pay more for underneath. Are you saving room for people, because a lot of them will have 2 cars,
Right.
okay? And they like visitors, okay? And there's deliveries.
So we've thought about that a bunch. Part of what our rationale now is, especially, time passes on, people get older. We want to have more smaller 1-bedroom units with a focus of those being very senior-centric units. And so we think that will help drive down a little bit of the demand on the parking side. We've also been talking to some of the other landowners nearby on Hampton Road about potentially looking at a purchase at some point. But I mean, really, what Greg's seen across all our developments is it's really, I can't afford to have this project not work out. We need to make sure that we have enough parking for what the tenants demand that are going to rent the space. So it's very important to us, and we'll try to get as many spaces on the site as we can without compromising those setback buffers, without, it's a bit of a fine balance, but we're finding on our other projects right now, we might be able to get 1.25. Once we get into the engineered design stage, we'll be able to figure that out. My goal would be like maybe 1.25, but I think like a 1-to-1 exceeds requirements of lots of cities. I know we're in Quispam and we don't have good public transit, and I appreciate that. But with the focus on seniors in the building, we think 1-to-1 is for sure something we say is a very achievable goal. Maybe we can do a bit more. We'll get the first building in. Maybe there'll be a little bit of play around for the next 2, but that's kind of where we're at.
I know my daughter lives in a high-rise apartment building in Moncton, right? and they have paid parking and no underground. Everybody has their own spot with their number on it.
Yeah, with the
Okay.
storage at the end of the unit. is
You
what
get
we're
one,
doing.
right? And then there's visitor parking. But a lot of people use the visitor parking also because they're two cars. So other people have to park somewhere else. So this is gonna be a problem because we are not into transportation. And I know you know, saying about seniors moving into smaller units. Yes, but I'm not sure a senior who has their own home would want to live in an area where there's 160 apartments. It's just overwhelming. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Plus, I probably strangled my husband that had to share that apartment, so there you go. Anyway, but
understand.
I would tell him that too. So. But what is the interpretation of affordable housing? What would a one-bedroom go for?
So that's part of the reason why we want to have more variety of units. So pretty much to make any project work right now, you got at least $2 to $2.50 a square foot rental achievement. At the end of the day, it's not any one of us here that's going to build a building. It's the bank given the financing for it, and they have very specific debt service requirements that we have to hit. And right now, essentially, we need to hit a 2.25 per square foot rental achievement, which means if you want to have a sub $2,000 a month apartment, or for a one bedroom that's sub 1,600, I need to build and we can do it now that you can design it nicely, but I need to build like a 550 square foot one bedroom, which could be a perfectly lovely space for a single person to be in. We were kind of, you know, I don't know, wood was cheaper, land was cheaper. It used to be easier, and interest rates were cheaper. Everything was cheaper before. It was easier to have larger units, but the reality now is even the unit sizes we propose in here would be unheardedly large in Halifax or Toronto. So it's just the reality of these projects. Like we need housing here, and these are the metrics that we have to work within. I have, if you would love to come and look, I have 525 square foot one bedroom units being built right now in St. John on the west side on Dever Road, and those will be all renting for sub $1,500 a month.
1,500 for one?
So somewhere between 12 and 15. I have a couple different sizes and layouts. That's why
It's
I
the
do
word
that.
affordable that gets
Yeah.
to me, because
So
that's not affordable
we're
for
also-
most people.
We're also going to be using the MLI Select program, which requires 15% of our units to be sub 30% of the average rental income in the community. 30% of the household income of the average renter in the community. So we should be able to have a few units, like around 15% that someone's making, you know, if they're making $35,000 a year, they would be rents in the like $1,200 range in that range, and that's specified by CMHC what our rent range has to be, and it has to be for at least 10 years in that range, minimum. Yeah, but by designing those smaller units, we're building in more affordable units for longer, really, because they're just a smaller unit.
So you're talking about a 500 foot,
550, 600 in that range.
but what you're getting there's 37 or whatever, that works out to be about 400 feet.
So we'll have some bachelors, we'll have some ones, we'll have some 1+ dens. There'll be a range of units. So there'll be a few bachelors, probably like 4 in each building or something like that. Once we get to the design, so those, if they're 400, they would be like $1,900 range, something like that.
But okay, but I'm not doing the math here. What you're suggested, or the bachelor is one size, but you're changing, your one bedroom would be like 37 or 37.
There'll be a couple different sizes. So say the average one was 500 square foot, the one bedroom. So you'd be at $1,150 a month in that range, or $1,200 range. We do a whole pricing matrix. Like the higher floors are more expensive, the lower floors are lower. Like, you know, same unit, top floor, bottom floor. I usually differentiate the rent by $200. So, you know, my most affordable units end up being the ground floor, like one bedroom or bachelor unit, and there would definitely be a bunch of those that would be sub $1,000.
So you're gonna have a bunch of bachelors and one bedroom, 2 bedrooms and 3s.
Probably around a third of the building, of the units, not gonna be a third, it'd be like probably around 25% would end up being around, of the whole total project would be in that one bachelor and one bedroom unit.
Okay. I'm still affordable word.
That's a CMHC guideline. Don't let us not joke ourselves. There's no such thing as new affordable housing.
I agree.
My drywaller charges me the same amount for affordable or non-affordable drywall. So the question is, we really want to talk affordability. Property expenses are our largest operating expenses. Fees in the construction process. HST, which this province has not yet forgiven, but all the other provinces have. And interest rates are controlled by the Fed. So the probably 35–40% of our total cost of our building are direct government fees. If we want to do it cheaper, we got to talk about fees and taxes. And so hopefully that changes in the future. If it does, we'll be able to adjust, 15% of our project cost right now is just HST, which is a percentage-based expense. Even though costs have doubled, the HST. I'm just trying to get to the point that, like, I totally hear you. I would love to be able to build cheaper units. I'm not the person causing the problem. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to the affordability and what affordability is, there's so many, there's numerous definitions of what that is. And a couple have been mentioned during the last, 5–10 minutes. You have based on rent, you have based on 30% of your household income, you have based on a region. That is where we're trying to get to, and so that's part of our challenge. As a municipality, as a region, however that plays out in the future, we need to define what affordability is for Quispamsis. And there are municipalities who have done that. They have defined what affordability is in their particular municipality. On the backside of that, and what helps achieve that goal, is there are incentive programs. So the local government or the regional government, however that may be, have incentive programs in place where there is opportunities for those developers, whether it's for profit or not for profit, have the ability to make an application to be part of that incentive program, whether that's X number of dollars per door, which assists in achieving affordable housing based on the definition. So we're missing all of that from a planning perspective, from a growth perspective. Those are items that are on the list to bring forward to council. And those have been identified in terms of whether there's incentive programs. Some municipalities, there's been study done in New Brunswick to look at inclusionary zoning. And it's some say yes, it works, some say it don't, right? So all those things are happening. So in terms of affordability, you are correct. What does that look like? We don't know. We can just refer to things that are outside of this particular arena, if you will, this municipality, but we need to bring it home to assist us in addressing the idea of affordable and what that looks like, and to make it easier to make these decisions. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Dwight. Any further questions from PAC to the applicant? Mark?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, again, through you, just to clarify here, so there's gonna be 80 underground parking space, am I correct to say that?
Correct.
240 per unit. So that means it's gonna be 120 parking, surface parking?
80, sorry. Yeah.
40,
Yeah,
80,
21.
I'm sorry, 80, I'm sorry. So my calculation here, 80. And in this plan, it shows 80 surface parking, am I correct to say that? Okay. Okay, no, I just want clarification, yeah, thank you.
If you want
Thank-
one-to-one, we have to cut.
Thank you. Any further questions for the applicant from members of PAC? None being, is there anyone in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against? What we're doing is making a recommendation, providing written views to council for the public hearing on September 12th. Dwight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee. So a couple of things. One is you're making written comments or comments to the council, but also in terms of the variances that have been asked. That will have to be part of your consideration tonight. And the other thing to note is there were letters sent to residents within 100 meters Some of those residents have provided comments back. Those comments, that correspondence should have been included in your package. You want to take that into consideration as well as you consider this request. From my brief review of them, I think traffic was one that was brought up, whether a traffic study was done, and that's been answered. That is still in the agreement and will be required prior to final, at least prior to permits and those things going out the door. So I just wanted to raise that to make sure the committee was aware.
Thank you, Dwight. With that being, would a member of PAC like to provide some comments on the recommendation for the public hearing? Mark?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have one more question, if I may. Is that okay, or?
Yep.
The biggest concern I got is the building at on Peak Drive. Would you entertain going 2-story instead of 3-story on that building?
I just go back to more than happy to sink it in the ground a little bit to make it less. Like, if you can't see it, it might as well not exist, according to my cat. You know, like it would disappear at least half. So 2.5 would be the same as a regular, and anybody would be building on that site. I want to build nice housing, but I also want to build affordable housing, and I want to build it relatively as fast as possible. You know, we're coming out of COVID here. It was chaotic. It was painful. I'm glad I didn't build much I did the Ross A. Farm and Choice building down the road during COVID and a storage building, which was renovating existing buildings. But we have enough units under construction right now. I feel pretty good about our cost. I've got my whole own civil crew. We're ready to get excavators over there as soon as I have the go-ahead. I think it's really important. While housing is a crisis situation, you see it every single day in the news, especially that back building is one of the more affordable buildings to build because it doesn't have the underground parking. Underground parking is great, but it's expensive. $50,000 a parking space, you know? And I really feel like that back building is, the density there really helps us work for the whole site. We need this density to make the numbers work. It's not easy to make the numbers work anymore, and this building is really the driver of the more affordable, affordableness in the overall project. So we wouldn't consider, we'll do everything we can to keep that 3rd story as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'm trying to support your project, but also take in consideration the concern that people living on Peak Drive. That's the dilemma. And we had the discussion the first time presentation, and the second time you came back with a solution of putting a storage in 1 story at the back, and then that was well received by everyone, even the people on Peak Drive. Yep. That's the challenge that I have with the development, and I'm not against what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from. I totally understand that part. But we still got to take in consideration the people living on Peak Drive, and their biggest concern is the height of the building, the 3rd building, not the 1st and 2nd, but the 3rd.
I've spoken to pretty much, I might not have gotten all, but most of the neighbors on Peak Drive on the back, that, you know, some of those letters, like I've spoken to them. You know, I think the discussion around, I mean, if we built a nice cedar fence and we made sure there was still as much greenage, trees, mature as possible at the back there, and it's a flat roof.
And increase the setback at the corner.
We could play with the driveway back there to keep more green.
Yeah.
The building probably has to be right around there, but we could keep that driveway cut closer to the building. I don't think you're gonna see a lot, much different than you would for a normal house.
It could be a recommendation of PAC for a flat roof back there.
Which we deserve.
Bring everything down.
Yeah, I think that's what we do, Mark. Put all our comments in the recommendation, 2.5, and cover off that boundary, then that goes to council, and that gets taken into consideration. Whatever we want, I think we should make sure that's included tonight. Goes to council, council has everything in front of them. If developer cannot meet those requirements or proposes not to, the development.
No, the only thing I'm trying to do is support your development.
Oh, yeah.
And also take in consideration the concern of the public.
It would make a big impact on the feasibility of the project, I can say that.
Okay.
Honestly, yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Brenda?
My comments I would make, maybe to pass on to council. I think the density is too high for that piece of property. And even the parking 1-to-1 is going to be a problem because there's no transportation. You know, you have to live in that apartment, and somebody works in Hampton, somebody works in St. John, it's gonna need two vehicles, no place to park it. I think it's just going to be overloading that property with the transportation and the number of units and people gathering outside, no place to gather. And because, you know, it'll.
Recommendation to Quispam to add more transit.
What are you recommending, Brenda?
Add one more what?
Transit.
Add more transit.
Improve the transit system.
Oh, yeah, good luck.
I'd vote for that.
Brenda, you
Even-
recommended a higher like a 1 to 1.25?
Yeah, I would be happy with the one
Okay.
point two five.
Well, that's weak, so let's get those comments
Yeah.
in our
Those are
document
my
tonight.
comments.
It's going to go to council, and that's all, we're not proving that, we're making recommendation
Yeah.
comments that they can take forward. So, you know, we're talking about traffic study, tree buffer in the lower left-hand corner and on that far side. Density, you mentioned about the density being high, can density be lowered? And increasing the parking from 1 to 1 to 1.25. Something like that, I'm the chairman, so I don't know what you guys.
It was point, the request was 1.75, then they went to 1 to 1.
They agreed to
Yeah,
1.
now they agreed to 1 to 1. Now you're asking 1.25.
Yeah, because we usually ask for 1.5.
Is that correct? Yeah, okay.
Instead of
So-
1.25.
Okay, go ahead, Dwight, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just would like to make a quick comment in terms of increasing the parking and recognizing, you know, okay, there's density. There's a fine line of a balance of where we have concerns about traffic and the need for a traffic study. And again, it's a lifestyle change, and I'll keep going back to that. And we recognize that, you know, we don't have a public transit system. And every opportunity that I have to present that to council, I do. If we're going to grow, not just as a community, but as a region, and be where we need to be, given the economic driving engine that's just up the road or down the road, and how that's panning out, the opportunities that are coming our way, there should be a primary focus of a better transit system across the region if we're going to grow. So from a planning perspective, my struggle is when we keep asking for more parking spaces, more parking spaces, more parking spaces, you're encouraging more traffic, which then becomes, okay, you're trying to balance, not have a traffic issue, but you're asking for more vehicles. How do you balance that out? So it goes back to me, it's a lifestyle change. And when you move into these buildings, you know what you're moving into, you know what your limitations are, right? And if it doesn't work for you, and I say it respectfully, maybe you have to look at other options. So, and the more hard surfaces you put in there, right? Obviously, you have to increase hard surfaces to get parking in there, which means you're encroaching on the buffers. And then it's causing stormwater management issues. And I recognize there is, you know, okay, the density is based on the size. But when we talk about, you know, what are we talking about here? 35, 40 units per acre? It's really not heavy density. Right. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We're starting to see communities now with maximum parking. People are talking about you can't go more than 1 to 1, like in the planning world, trying to get that down to Dwight's comments that more impermeable surface, less landscaping. Anyway, you know the arguments, but it's interesting of where's the right number gonna land on parking for the next few years.
And same thing on the density side, 40 units an acre is a very, yeah, Eddie, I mean, you can speak to that. That's a very low density in most communities.
Okay, thanks. We're gonna move them forward. Brent?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion so we can get this moving forward and with our comments for council. I'll make the motion that PAC recommend the following for council, and all members have the opportunity to add to this as we go forward, because I'll probably miss some things. Parking 1-to-1 ratio, the third building furthest from Hampton Road, as discussed with developer, we built first. Elevation not to exceed more than 2.5 stories. With the presentation from, is it Pete Street in the back? Pete Drive, with an elevation view no more than a residential, common residential house being built there. Traffic study to be completed prior to building 2 starting. We'll get building 3 started. Traffic study to be completed before 2 and 1 building permits are issued. The southeast corner where the driveway abuts the property line, the setbacks to be increased, the curvature to be designed so that we maximize the setback. With regards to development agreement between the development officer and the developer, a reasonable setback is to be put in place. No trees to be cut on property except for the during development phase, minimum impact. We've had that happen before, clear cutting. We don't want that to happen on the property. So basically, you can go in and cut what you need.
Yeah.
So basically, you can go in.
Running services back through the site. I mean, it's not. I don't know. Dwight, do you have a
Yeah, you can cut your road in, and you can cut out what you need to cut out.
like for the 3 buildings?
No, start with your first building.
I don't know if that's an option because I mean, so I'm not an engineer, but
Yeah.
there is quite a bit of grading that has to happen on site.
Oh, that's
And the trees, so
but
I don't know.
that's why it's also as discussed with the development
Okay,
officer.
okay, work with that. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to promise something that's impossible.
Yeah, building number 3, flat roof.
Mhm.
Does that cover everything?
Yeah, plus the variances?
Fence.
Oh, fence across the back on the south end of the property.
Some of the neighbors didn't want one, so I'll do whatever they
No,
want.
we'll
Or
just
whatever
put
you guys say. Yeah.
development agreements, privacy,
that's
privacy fence across the south end of the property, bordering Pete Drive. Is there anything else we missed?
The variances? Was there variances?
Yeah, there's 3 variances. Lot frontage, lot width variance, a reduction in the minimum lot floor size for a one-bedroom unit to 33 square meters.
Slash bachelor units or bachelor suites is acceptable.
And the parking ratio, although it's 1-to-1, there's still a variance because the bylaw says 1.5, so,
Yeah.
which you've mentioned in terms of the 1-to-1 ratio, so
Yeah.
you granted that one.
So the variance be granted of 0.5 so that we have a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yep.
And the lot frontage is,
So, can you read those back, you think? I think we should, it's important, right?
Yes. I've got parking 1-to-1 ratio, but that changed in at the bottom, correct?
No.
So basically acknowledge the variance of 1.5, that it become a ratio of 1.1.
Okay.
So variance of 0.5,
Third building, no more than 2.5 story.
correct?
Traffic study.
Required.
Required.
Traffic study required.
Yep.
After first building is completed, building permit cannot be issued for second building until
Traffic studies done.
traffic study is completed.
Okay. Okay.
The variances. Yeah, just hang on now.
Setbacks increased at the southeast corner.
Southeast, yeah. So basically where the curvature of the driveway comes in.
No trees to be cut. I didn't catch the end of,
No trees removed except for what's required for development of the
Okay.
property. And that's to be discussed with the development officer.
flat roof fence.
Yeah, flat roof in building 3 and
Privacy fence along the
south end of the
south
property.
corner, south property line.
Basically the one that borders Pete Drive.
And the variances, the lot frontage, the lot width, and the parking ratio variance.
And the 37% for the, there's 37 meters for the bachelor studios, or bachelor apartments, or studio apartments.
37 square meter reduction, wasn't it?
Reduced down to, isn't it?
Yes.
Down, reduced down to 37 square meters.
Dwight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, one point of clarification on the motion for planning staff's sake. The traffic study. So my concern with, as it's presented for consideration to the committee, is if you issue the permit for the first building and then you say, okay, you can undertake traffic study, there may be recommendations in that traffic study that puts the project sideways. So the traffic study can be done prior to the building. However, the recommendations of the traffic study can happen in phases. There's a difference there, right? Because we don't know what the recommendations could be. It could be traffic lights, it could be.
Traffic study be done prior to commencement of the buildings, but the outcome of the traffic study can be incorporated
Can be
after
phased, can be
construction of building
phased,
one.
based on the recommendations.
Did we catch everything there, Dwight, you think?
254, there was a recommendation in my staff report regarding the buffering with 254, which is where the driveway goes in. If you look at the setback from that property line, when you get into grading, what is going to happen to that grade? Obviously, there's going to be some excavation that's happening along there. So you look at what is the sustainability of maintaining existing vegetation. So what is the planned buffering along that side? That will have to be incorporated into the plan as well. We don't have to get into specifics today because there could be retaining walls, there could be whatever, but it's taking a reasonable measures to ensure there's adequate buffering between that property and the development.
Okay.
Only trees for the development of the property can be removed, is that not gonna cover that, or is that a separate?
Because that relates to the actual construction is what happens after the fact. The buffering, that's the focus of that particular item. So.
And then the buffering with neighboring properties, subject to the development's agreement and the development officer?
Yep.
Be adequately mutually agreed upon?
Perfect. Thank you. Any other members of PAC like to add any comments or items to that, what we just discussed? None being. Can we have a seconder on that? Kendall?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Kendall. Can we have a vote on that, please? Don't forget, it's going to council for a public hearing. Oh, is there any debate on that motion? Sorry, forgot about that. None being, have a vote, please. With that being, that motion's carried by a vote of 3-1. So that'll be going to council for the council meeting for the public hearing. Please make sure you work with the town, have all necessary paperwork, documentation in place, and best of luck at the public hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, PC.
You're welcome.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to the secretary, a point of order in that the vote was 3-1, so the nay vote needs to be recorded for the record of the person who voted nay.
That being, we're gonna move on to item 7C, which was 7B, 240 Hampton Road. Model Farm Road, sorry, could the applicant please come up to the podium and state their name for the record, please?
Terrence Robichaud.
Terrence, Mr. Robershaw, we're gonna have Jennifer introduce that item to us first. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to the committee members. Before you is an application for a detached garage at 240 French Village Road, Model Farm Road. So it is for several variances, actually. The size of the building is exceeding the 63 square meters that's permittable by the bylaw. The requested size is 107 square meters. Will be found before the front line of the main dwelling. It is a challenging lot to develop, and with the service connection that is found in the front yard. The location that has been chosen by the applicant seems to be the most cost-effective and easiest place to develop on the lot for a detached garage. We'd also be looking as one of the measurements of the dimensions of the building exceeds 10 meters. It's actually 11 meters. There's a requirement for a variance for that as well. We have sent out the notification letters to surrounding properties and have received 2 letters of concern. The first letter of concern identified an increase of water runoff since the preparation of the site. Would like to note that one of the requests of recommendation actually is for a site drainage plan to be submitted prior to any development permits being released to the lot. And the second, a letter of concern focused on noise during the construction and during the life cycle of the building itself. And I would just like to bring to the committee's attention that those concerns would fall under the noise bylaw, where construction is limited in Quispamsis from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. Monday to Saturday. I am open to any questions the committee members may have.
Thank you, Jennifer. You would have received the same information we did in the mail. Anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to comments from questions from PAC or members of the public?
Oh, no, I talked to my neighbor next to me, so, and she was concerned I was gonna build a 2-story garage and all this. I said, no, it's just 1 level. I'm complying, it's cement foundation, with a frost wall in the front and part. It's storage for my own vehicles.
Yep.
I'm tired of paying storage fees for vehicles in the wintertime. And I talked to her, she had concerns, but I mean, she basically said it would be in the front of her house. It's not gonna be in the front of her house, it's back. And her house faces my property, which faces a bunch of trees that I left there as a bumper. The second one that complained about water runoff and stuff, and the water all runs down into the ditch, and I have a pipe that they put years ago into the storm drain that used to run up my driveway to run my foot drain into it. So I mean, I wrote everything down that I could and
Okay.
described it, where the water's running, as you see where the building is. I mean, it might be 1 meter within that 15-meter bumper, which I could probably push back farther if I had to. I mean, the ground is very hard. Once I dig down, it's just like hard pan. Any water that's gonna run, it runs off behind me. Like I could constantly, well, you were there yesterday, and everything runs down on me, so I try to divert it down. I mean, like, I have water that runs down from me, from my neighbor, from behind me. I don't say nothing, we just keep a ditch going to the ditch itself. So I try to be a good neighbor to people, so I don't, we've been there 41 years, and this is the first time I applied for something, so.
All right, thank you. Any members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? None be, oh, Brenda?
Your garage is going to just have peak roof, but it's not going to have a loft in it?
No, it's just a peak roof,
Just peak
an
roof.
8-foot wall with a regular pitch roof on it.
Okay,
You know,
Thank you.
Like, they asked me how high it was, I said max would be 15 feet, like an 8-foot
Yeah.
wall. on the roof.
but you can visualize it sitting up there.
And
it had-
actually, the roof would be lower than my neighbor's house.
So, there you go.
Because it's down into the bank, right?
Thank you.
Any further questions for the applicant? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? None being, would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions, please? Mark?
Mr. Chairman, I'll put a motion forward to advise committee to approve the following variance from zoning bylaw 038, an 18-meter setback variance from section 8G1BI, a 1-meter variance to section 8G1B111, a 44 square meter gross floor area variance from section 8G1C and a 1 meter dimension variance from section 8G1C to permit the development of a detached garage such that is located beyond the front line of the main dwelling, having a setback to the street line of 14 meters, a gross floor area of 107 square meters with a horizontal dimension of 11 meters at 240 Model Farm Road, PID number 69237, subject to the following terms and conditions. 1. A site drainage plan is submitted for review prior to the issuance of a building permit, identifying how an increase of stormwater runoff will be managed on the subject lot. And number 2, a building permit is obtained prior to any construction.
Thank you, Mr. Goslin. Can I have a seconder on that, please? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Any debate in that motion? None being, can we have a vote, please? That motion's carried unanimously. 5 to 7 business days, you have a letter in the mail, so please work with the town to have all necessary paperwork and documentation in place. And best of luck.
Thank you. How do I pay for the permit? Tomorrow or?
Come into the office.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll email you.
I'll leave in, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. With that being, we're gonna move on to item 7D. That's Fernwood Drive, Fernwood Park. Could the applicant please come up to the podium?
Peter Donovan.
Peter, Dwight, you wanna introduce that item? I think that's Dwight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee, this is a tentative or subdivision application that's come to the planning department for consideration for the creation of 20 residential lots in an R1 zone. The application requires some lot width variances, as noted in my staff report, lots 16, 17, as they sit sort of in the cul-de-sac, which means they're sort of narrow at the front, but they have more than the excessive lot area in terms of the minimum requirements of 1,140 square meters. There is also a street width variance or right-of-way width variance that's required for the cul-de-sac as well. Of, I think, 2 meters. Yep. So what's proposed is creation of 20 residential lots, extension of an existing public street, Merlin Drive, which will connect down to another existing public street, Meadow Arc, which provides sort of a better traffic flow or traffic movement within the area once it's fully built out. The creation of a cul-de-sac, which has been identified on the plan as Kingfisher. This is, as noted in my staff report, an alternate name will need to be submitted, as there are conflicts with existing names in the municipality and in the region, as well as the creation of just over 3,100 square meters of land for public purposes. Because the plan is proposing the creation of public streets and land for public purposes, it does require the review of both the Planning Advisory Committee, and it will be moved on to council for assent prior to final subdivision plans. Overall, the subdivision is, typical residential development. With streets, the streets obviously have to be designed. We have not received any design drawings at this stage for the street construction or the engineered stormwater and sanitary. To my knowledge, the developer can correct me if I'm wrong or if I've missed something. So that will be forthcoming. As I've noted in my staff report, because I don't have sort of the grade profile for the streets, I can't confirm whether there's variances required for that. If that is identified through the review of the engineer design drawings, then obviously we would come back to PAC for a variance. However, there are ways of mitigating that in terms of stormwater management. Once you get over 6%, then you have to introduce pipe systems or some sort of acceptable alternative. And you can go up to 10%, which I don't anticipate we would see in this particular area, given the elevations. Sanitary sewer is municipal service. Water there would be drilled wells, I've indicated the need for at least an abbreviated study in this particular case. The comprehensive was done for the initial phase 6, however, that sits outside of this particular PID, and it's under some, we're getting into that range of between 10 and 24, so an abbreviated study to confirm there is adequate water of quantity and quality to meet the demand. Land for public purposes being provided, as council may, or PAC may recall, there is obviously a credit that's available, but the developer is proposing the creation of some land for public purposes that would obviously be in time once the development is complete. Green space, but is also providing access, an alternate access to the stormwater management channel that flows along the rear of the properties of Meadowlark. This will also address some of the concerns that we've heard in terms of the activities and behind sort of the trail where it's going to sit along the existing properties. From a planning perspective, this is sort of a better approach and access to the area versus where the initial land for public purposes was proposed to get access to the drainage channel through there. The overall intent is that there would be a pedestrian trail that's developed that would sort of provide that pedestrian trail movement through the area. Thing I've noted in my staff report is that it does encroach into a wetland area, which means, again, to be confirmed through conversations with DOE, whether there's compensation that's required, how that plan plays out in the future, whether that's solely on the developer or if it's a cost share, is something that we can look at as we move through the development agreement stage. But obviously that would be a decision of council ultimately. But if PAC has recommendations that they would like to bring forward, this is an opportunity for them to do so as it relates to the development of that trail, and if there's compensation that's required for destruction of a portion of the wetland. There were some concerns expressed. Those have been included in your package as mentioned before. PAC should review those, and if there's any questions that would come forward, I'm open to answer them. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Mr. Donovan, you would receive the same package we didn't mail. Anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to members of PAC or the public asking some questions?
No, that's excellent. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members of PAC have any questions for the applicant? Brenda.
One, is this the last phase of this project, or there's something after it?
So, what we're doing at this stage is we're making our street connection back into Merlin Drive. A good portion of the land remaining has some environmental concerns. So we've been working with the Department of Environment and Dwight over the last couple of years to see what's possible in those areas. So Dwight had mentioned, including the trail itself, there's going to be some compensation paid because we're going to be into some wetland areas. So potentially this could be the last phase of the subdivision. Potentially there are two fairly large remnants remaining after this, so there's potential for future development.
Okay, I guess that's what it comes to mind, because we have things that have not been followed, like that gentleman's fencing area and something like that. So if this is the last phase, how does a town hold you accountable to complete all of these things that were in the notice of decision with the trees and the fencing and things like that? How do we hold you accountable if this potentially your last phase and you can say, I'm done, and walk away?
Dwight, is this a question for you or me?
Dwight, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So to Ms. Valley's question, comment, so that there's development agreements that are associated with each phase. So in phase 6, in terms of there was a tree restoration plan that was submitted. That's part of the development agreement that needs to be executed. Notice the decision indicated addressing the concerns of the property owner at 6 Daigle. Those are binding as part of the development agreement. There is security that's been deposited with the town. That release of that security is contingent on those items being addressed. So if they're not addressed, then obviously town has the right through the development agreement to claim on that security to complete the work. So that's,
There for to accomplish these.
yeah, so it goes down to a minimum amount that we would look at what is our outstanding. If it's, you complete the development, then 15% of that security is held for 1 year for a maintenance period. We look at, prior to releasing any portion of it, what is the 15%? Does it cover any outstanding items? If it doesn't cover the outstanding items, we note those. That gets added to your minimum 15% that you carry for 1 year. Did you get that? Get the numbers? So that's where we are. As recommended in my staff report, in terms of the tree remediation plan, that should be carried forward and brought forward into this as well. And the reason the concerns regarding the fencing and the issue and the concerns raised by the property owner 60, they weren't brought forward in my staff report because this is a separate phase. And they were addressed as part of phase 6, which is a notice decision, which was attached to the development agreement, which is still binding. Correct. And that will need to be done prior to release. And that, I did meet on site with the developer in May of this year to talk about that in terms of the status of where it sits. I'll leave that question to Mr. Donovan to answer.
I'd love to know the.
Okay, so it is my understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but no one has, in our development agreement, we're not required to build a fence at 6 Dickel Drive. We've been asked to build a fence by the property owner. We've been asked to work with the property owner. I made a proposal to the property owner that would see a fence erected on his property, which was rejected. So in turn, we have not built a fence on the property. We proposed several things to the planning department through Dwight to other options that we can do in terms of sloping on the property line, which we've discussed, as he mentioned, in May. So at this stage, I don't believe that I'm obligated to build a fence there. I did make a proposal that would have saw a fence there that was rejected.
What do you feel obligated to do for that gentleman for his property? Nothing?
We would complete the cross-section as shown on our design drawings. It would include sloping the land and topsoiling and hydroseeding it.
Did you have to do any blasting to get that street down there beside his property?
We did not.
Nothing at all? It's just rock?
It is rock, yes. We used a pneumatic rock hammer. We didn't blast
Oh,
anything.
you do the jackhammer type of thing?
Yes.
Any other questions from members of PAC to the applicant? I have one through to Dwight. I guess we're on phase 7A. How many phases are actually completed to date in this subdivision?
Through to you, Mr. Chair, to my knowledge, there's a number of them that are at the stage of issuing of certificates of completion. So they have met all the requirements in terms of the development agreement, in terms of infrastructure and those types of things. Now the next step is to be in that 1 year warranty period. Once that's complete, then they can go to council to get certificates of final completion and then the security would be released. So to my knowledge, phases 3A, 4, 5 are under that. But again, I'd have to go back to confirm. But I think they're approaching that stage if they're not already in there. There is some outstanding items with respect to phase 3B, with respect to the land for public purposes and what was going to happen. And that's right now sort of being tied into what's happening in this phase, which will give us some better guidance in terms of how that's going to pan out. That's sort of where that one sort of sits.
Okay, thank you, Dwight. Any further questions from PAC members to the applicant? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Okay, Mr. Donovan, could you have a seat? Could you please come up, state your name for the record, please?
My name is Dave, excuse me, David Down, and I live at 6 Deagle Drive,
Okay,
right adjacent to the construction that's going on.
okay,
First of all, council, I've been here 3 times now, and council said, or people in the office said that there should be a water line up level with my water line, because one day I'm gonna have to hook up with town water. And the line that he's left is about 15 to 20 yards down over the hill. So I'm reliable to cover it the rest of the way, which I'm not, because they said it's got to be level with what I have to dig from the side of the road through my property to my line. I think that's right, isn't it?
Dwight, I don't know if you can answer that, Dwight, or have any idea on that?
When you get water,
Through you, Mr. Chair, so there's no water in this area. What's being discussed is the actual sewer line. That property would be on-site sewage disposal, because that area was not serviced with municipal sewer until this Fernwood development was undertaken. So what's been extended or provided to that particular property would have been a sewer lateral. The bylaw requires, or the language in the utility bylaw is that the lateral goes from the main pipe in the street to the street right of way, right? It doesn't necessarily go into the actual properties for that particular purpose. I would have to go back to revisit what the development agreement and the notice of decision was to get into the particulars, whether that was to be extended all the way to the house. We normally don't, from a town perspective, we normally don't force an existing property owner who's on a septic system that is working to connect to a system until that such time, if it is needed, that is available. Okay, so there wouldn't be, the town would not be forcing the property owner to connect unless there was a reason to do so. Failure of the on-site septic system or some other reason. So I'd have to go back to look at the actual wording of the notice of decision and development agreement. But in terms of the developer, under typical conditions, they're simply responsible to extend from the main in the street, the pipe in the street, to the street right away, the property line.
Thank you, Dwight. Mr. Downs, any further questions?
yeah, the sewer system, I had a 1,000-gallon tank put in about 10 years ago, so I don't think I need one for a long time, but the law might come eventually that I'd have to hook up. Again, there should be a pipe up to where on the side of the road to where my property line is.
Is it not run up to your property line now?
No,
Okay. So that's something the town should look into, and they will, so. Yeah.
and the third thing is council has already sent a letter to me that the land that he took from me, or he's got to give me back, I think it's 4 or 5 feet from where my line is now. And there's nothing done, it's just caving in. He did put a fence up, a snow fence, the orange one. It's all way down now and everything. And they said that he should build a 5-foot solid fence from one end of my property to the other. Because in the wintertime, all the snow just piles up on the side of my house. In the summertime, you get dust. We hang out clothes all the time because we're supposed to conserve energy from the hydro, so that's what we do. But then you get dirt and dust coming in all the time off the trucks. I know he has to have trucks running down there all the time, but if we had a fence, that would stop a lot of that dust and dirt.
Okay, well, we're taking that into consideration. Did you have a letter or a document from council dictating that? Is that what
I
you?
do have, and I didn't bring it with me, but
Okay.
I will.
Just bring that to Dwight and see how that comes out, and Dwight will look into look into the notice of decision and see what is required from that previous decision when the construction was started there.
I know you all want progress, and I can understand that, but it was such a nice, quiet area at one time. But now those trucks, tailgates banging all the time, it just drives you crazy, you know.
Okay,
And I think that's about it for now.
okay,
I
thank
hope
you.
we don't have to come back anymore.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come up and state your name for the record, please?
My name's Shannon Cameron. I believe on the town's records you have my maiden name, Thistle, but Shannon Cameron.
Okay, please proceed.
So our main area of concern, and I guess where we might just want some clarification, is in the piece of paper we received in the letter. We live on the property right next to Junco Lane, so 12 Diggle Drive, right there. So right now, one new house was just built on there that we weren't even aware of. We were never given any notice about that home being built. We knew about the homes behind us being built, and that was fine. They didn't cause us many issues. But our concern is it appears to us that this is zoned for 2 more houses to be built right beside our home. And the way they're facing is their backyard is right on the side of our property line, and it's very close. We've had a horrible experience with this house that was built just this past summer, so we're quite concerned having to go through 2 more. So I guess, like, is a fence going to be built on that property line? Like, we want to know what's going to be done to make sure that our property's not being compromised. The gradient of the property of the house right now is much higher than ours, so we're worried about water runoff. There's a lot of concerns.
Can you zoom in there, Kirsty, any on that drawing so we can see what we're referencing, and maybe you can go point out your lot on the plan.
Like the long skinny one, number 12.
I will say though, those 3 lots fronting Junco Lane are not part of this development. This is a different plan, a different developer.
Yeah.
It is
See, we just
not
weren't
part
sure
of,
'cause it didn't specify, so that was our concern, is if
Right.
those 3 are being slotted to have something built in this development.
That
That
is
was our.
not part
Okay.
of the subdivision phase.
Okay,
Wonderful. Then we don't really take issue with it.
all right.
Just worried about those ones.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come up and state your name for the record, please?
Good evening. My name's Adam Russell. I was here a year ago for the Phase 6 subdivision proposal. I got just a couple of things that I'd like to clarify. This is Phase 6B.
It's the next item. This is the next subdivision. I think this is related to Country View. This is Fernwood. I think
So-
yours is-
You're waiting for the next agenda
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the next one.
Yeah.
Very good.
Any other one in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Third and final time, is there anyone in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come back to the podium, Mr. Donovan? Anything you want to add to any of those comments or concerns that were addressed?
Just that if I'm responsible to build a fence, I will gladly do it.
Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of things. So I went back and the notice of decision that was issued for Phase 6 for Fernwood, the item regarding 6 Dago, there were 2 items that were noted. Was a reduction in the street right-of-way width of Junco, which happened, and then that remnant from the street reduction was to be transferred to the property owner at 6 Dago, which I believe has been undertaken. And the next item was the remediation of any excavated land adjacent to 6 Dago Drive to the street line of the engineered right-of-way with a finished slope ratio as determined as being acceptable by the town's engineering department and the property owner of 6 Dago Drive. So there was no sort of specific reference to the actual construction of a fence. It was sloping the right-of-way in a manner that it would not be a safety concern.
That's not completed yet, correct?
That is not completed at this stage. As my understanding has been indicated tonight, the developers working with the property owner come to a reasonable solution, so.
You're working with him to try to come up with a sloping on that?
We have not been working together. I've been working with the planning department to complete the work within the right of way. He really wants a fence.
Okay.
And through you, Mr. Chair, just on the next, the item that was brought forward with respect to the 3 properties that are abutting 12 Deagle, I believe. So what that was a remnant piece of land that was owned by a separate property owner who submitted a subdivision plan to creation of 3 lots. The ability to subdivide these lots, subdivide that land to get 3 lots became an opportunity because of the sewer line that was put in as part of the Fernwood development. What that allowed was that land in the absence of a municipal sewer system, you had to be 1 acre. Now with the ability to service that land by a sewer system, that means you can have 1/4 of an acre lots. That particular land is situated on a public street. It can be serviced by municipal sewer. So those lots meet the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw as well as the subdivision bylaw. So they're a straight up subdivision plan, right? They're residential lots, abutting residential lots in a residential zone. So the building location would obviously have to meet the setbacks, 7.5 meters from the front, 7.5 meters from the rear, 3 meters from each side. If it meets all those conditions, they can develop.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donovan, I got a question for you. Like, there was talks about remediation of the land and the sloping and the grass. Is there common ground to build the fence and not do that you can get an agreement with Mr. Downs to solve that issue, or is that a non-issue?
So when we were, one of the times I was here previously, you asked us to work together that's the last thing you usually say when everyone leaves. You ask us to work together. So he and I went out in the hallway and we chatted, and I asked for him to write a letter to Quispamsis Town Council supporting our development. And if he did that, then I would build the fence at my cost. And he did not do that.
Okay, no. Thank you. Brent, or Kendall, sorry.
And the fence was to be constructed on his property,
Yes.
and he was not okay with it, writing the agreement letter and constructing it on his property.
It was not acceptable to him to write the letter to council supporting the development.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So there's nothing in our bylaws that says once you exceed a certain height, right, from change elevation where you have to put a fence in, right? And this is part of where the challenge comes from. It becomes a condition or recommendation of council or of PAC, which comes to the development officer. I can bring that to council and say, this is what's been recommended by PAC. Council will take that into consideration as part of their assent on the subdivision plan prior to final subdivision plan approvals. So there's nothing in the subdivision bylaw that basically says when you exceed a certain height, meter, 2 meters, 10 meters, you need to put in a fence if you cannot provide a safe, stable slope, right? So if you can hit, and this is why the notice of decision of the PAC was to provide, or at least some sort of slope, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, whatever that is, basically to provide a safe transition from the property line of 6 Deagle down to the street edge, right? So there's nothing in our bylaws where we can say, you meet 1, 2, and 3, therefore you need a fence, right? So it comes down to what is reasonable. So is it simply doing excavation, sloping to get a reasonable slope that can be maintained? It's in the municipal right-of-way, right? It's what we're looking at. We want to get away from that basically drop-off, if you will. Right. So it becomes a recommendation of PAC that I would bring forward to council as part of the assent.
But it's my understanding that the developer did that or is doing that, and also would build the fence. So I'm not sure what else we want him to do.
The other item
Maybe I
to
missed
keep a note is this is phase 7. We're talking about an item that's in phase 6 that is currently under a development agreement that currently has a notice of decision. So from a staff perspective, we're the ones that are responsible for enforcing that. So until we get a reasonable solution, we retain security, right? It becomes very difficult to say, well, we're not approving this subdivision because of like from a planning perspective, PAC perspective, your role is to look at what's being proposed. Does it meet with the municipal plan? Is it a reasonable subdivision? Provide recommendations. Those recommendations can be brought forward to council. It's council who makes the final decision to say yes, however you need to address or do whatever that may be. So it's two separate phases here that we're dealing.
Thank you, Dwight. Okay, with that being, all that information was provided to us. Would a member of PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions with reference to 7A? Or this phase, 7A? I believe it is. Yep. Kendall.
I'll put a recommendation forward. I might need a little help if there's anything I missed, but I recommend that PAC agree to the recommendations below. Number one, the acceptance of the street layout and design for phase 7A. Number two, the suitability and intent of the proposed LPP lands for phase 7 is to satisfy the LPP requirements. And number three, the granting of a lot width variance for lots 16 and 17. And I'm not sure if I have to read them all, but I do agree with all the development officers' conditions below. 1, 2 through 12.
The item that was missed in the staff report is regarding the street right-of-way width variance for Kingfisher Court, as noted on the plan. That I believe is
16 meters?
16 meters, wasn't it?
With variance of 2 meters.
2 meters.
2 meters.
Accept Dwight's guidance on that one.
Yeah.
Uses words.
For Kingfisher Drive. A lot width variance, a street right-of-way width variance of 2 meters will be required for Kingfisher Court.
That is correct.
I have a seconder on that, please. Brent?
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that.
Thank you. Any debate in that motion?
Mr. Chairman, my only question is for staff regards to LPP. Do we need to make reference to Department of Environment or the trail or anything, Dwight, or is that kind of all-inclusive? Or do we need to get into more detail, I guess, is my question.
So the recommendation that I would be seeking from PAC is, do they support the LPP that is proposed? And that's the main item. And then the second item would be anything with respect to whether there should be a cost sharing of compensation if it's required, or if they believe it should be solely on the developer, or if it's something that's solely taken care of by the town. If they have a recommendation that they would like to put forward for me to bring to council. But again, I'll leave that at the discretion of the PAC committee.
Thank you, Dwight. With that being, can we have a vote on that, please? Pardon? We did, and we didn't Dwight address the question, sorry.
The comment that was in my staff report was I was looking for PAC to actually provide a recommendation whether they support the LPP that's been provided. So your recommendation would be PAC supports the LPP as presented as part of the plan. And then the second part of that was regarding recognizing that a portion of that LPP sits in a wetland. Any development of that LPP may require, again, until we confirm with DOE, depending on what the scope of the development of that LPP is, if there's compensation required, is that compensation to be paid entirely by the town? Is it to be a cost sharing arrangement, or is it to be paid by the developer?
Any recommendation from Kendall or Brent on that? Cost sharing or Brent?
My recommendation would be the onus we put on the developer. He's the one providing the land that isn't in a sensitive area.
Thank you. Kendall, you okay with that? Perfect. All members of PAC agree with that? Let's have a vote, please. So we're gonna agree that the LPP near the wetlands, that cost can be borne to the developer. If it doesn't meet the requirements. Is that what it says?
Will be responsibility of the developer.
Correct. Did you get that? Can we open up the voting now, please? That vote's closed, with the motion carried by a vote of 3-1. Next 5 to 7 business days, have your letter in the mail. Please work with town, have all necessary documentation in place. And Mr. Downs and Mr. Donovan, I hope you guys can come to an agreement. There was some proposals back and forth, so please try to work out the differences to get that solution. There was an offer on the table. I'm not familiar what that offer was. Maybe that can be resurrected and common ground can be found that'll help Mr. Downs satisfy your needs with your property and with Mr. Donovan. It's always good to have good neighbors and hopefully that can work out. And please reach out to the town if anything needs to come to light on through the Dwight side on planning side. Thank you. That being, we'll move on to item 7E. And that is Country View Estates Subdivision Phase 6B. Could the applicant please at the podium state your name for the record, please?
Peter Donovan.
Peter, thank you. Dwight, you want to introduce that item for us, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee. This is a subdivision application that's come before the planning department because it's creating a public street as well as it requires some variances, particularly lot width variances for 4 lots, which is noted in my staff report, the amount of the variance required. As also, I would like to indicate there was an oversight on my part in terms of a street right-of-way width. The plan had indicated 2 widths, if you will, and one indicated it was 20 meters, but if you look closely, it's actually 16 meters, so there's a 4 meter street right-of-way width that's required. That street right-of-way width is reasonable given the fact that the development is proposing underground storm water management infrastructure as well as sidewalk. So when you look at the rationale between the reason why we asked for a 20 meter wide right-of-way is for those particular reasons, to ensure that there's adequate width to for a stormwater management system, as well as if there's any future street upgrades, sidewalks or anything, so similar facilities. there is room within the street right-of-way width to accommodate that. Because it's being presented as part of the initial build, then you can adjust the right-of-way width accordingly, so the ask is reasonable. I'll make a comment regarding the variances, the lot width variances that have been asked. Again, these lots sit around the curve of cul-de-sac. It is very common to see the lots narrow at the front and then widen as you go further back. The key element is that we look at, do you have the lot depth and do you have the lot area? As noted in my staff report, the lot areas of these lots that are seeking the variances are more than, in excess of the minimum lot area of 1,140 square meters for a lot that sits in an R1 zone serviced by municipal sewer. The plan, so in terms of variances, it meets the requirements. Some of the street grades are a little more, I believe, than 6%, but because the stormwater management will be done by underground infrastructure, that meets the requirements of the subdivision bylaw. Okay, so that is not sort of a concern. The proposal is to create 11 residential lots. Again, some variances are required, as I've noted. They all, other than that, they all meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. They all front public streets. Sanitary service is by municipal sewer, potable water. Again, I've noted that the initial comprehensive study that was done for phase 6A, the way it's worded in the report is that it was done for that particular PID and including the remnant. So based on the recommendations of the report, it indicates that it did include the remnant parcel, but we're not clear as to what extent. Did it look at all the potential lots or just a certain portion of it? So there's a recommendation basically that you just, some sort of confirmation that the findings still are applicable to this particular application. So it's not really an abbreviated study. He doesn't have to go back and do the study, but it's simply confirming that what was sort of that remnant part. Was it the whole thing or was it a certain portion of it? Stormwater management, again, has been done. We have preliminary design drawings that clearly looks at pre and post flows. This water will be collected through underground infrastructure. It gets stored into an on-site attenuation pond that's going to be constructed in part of the land for public purposes under phase 6A. That's a controlled release. Water comes in, it's held for a period of time, and then has this controlled release to mitigate downstream impacts. Again, these plans have to be reviewed by the engineering department to ensure compliance and alignment with the specifications, but based on preliminary initial reviews, things seem to be in order with that particular bylaw. Notice was sent out to residents within 100 meters of the subject property. There have been some concerns that have been initiated. Again, those are included in your package. I do recommend that you review them, and I'm sure you have. And if there's any questions that are generated from those concerns, I'm open to questions and addressing anything that may come out of that. I'll leave it there for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dwight. Mr. Donovan, you would receive the same package we didn't mail. Anything you'd like to add or discuss before PAC asks you some questions or members of the public?
I don't have anything else to add, no.
Okay, thank you. Kendall.
I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I guess it's in regard to this picture, and maybe this is probably obviously a previous phase, but I guess if staff sent this to me on one of our construction projects, I'd have a lot of concern with where we could go in terms of being charged with enforcement. I do see like the hay bales kind of upstream, but I do see the culvert, it looks like the heavy sedimented water is kind of traveling to the culvert. I know there's a lot of intense rainstorms in the last few years, but maybe someone can just walk me through like what is actually the problem, and is this occurring all the time, or is this, like, to be very honest, I haven't been on this construction site, but I would have a lot of concerns about what's happening here.
Chrissy, would you be able to pull up the Just an ortho? So this is the current work area that was phase 6A. The contours of this property run, while they come down the hill, they also run this way. The photograph that you're seeing is from here, looking this way. Our final catch basin is right here, and an abundance of this water finds its way out here. So in reality, what we're trying to do with phase 6B, that'll include a rear lot swale that's gonna bring it back into our system. So because this isn't completed, there's a bunch of water heading out that way. So that swale is designed to catch water from here to here. And this culvert coming down the hill is, I'll say it's surcharging, but it's running pretty full. So they're combining at that culvert, and it's making quite a mess. I think the picture is a bit outdated. I think the conditions are quite a lot better at this point.
been on your site either, so.
So there's a ton of water going that way. There's a couple big trees here that it's going down between the stumps and stuff like that. And it's essentially bypassing our system altogether. Rear lot swale here is gonna bring that all back in. And that'll be part of our design package for 6B.
And kind of has staff, Quispamsis staff already looked at that and kind of feel comfortable with it? The storm system?
I think that the storm system actually is gonna perform incredibly well. Like the two ponds are completed and commissioned. We have rear lot swale here that's working really well.
And
It's
is
a matter
there
of
more
completion.
vegetation or
There is.
in place now to control all the sedimentation erosion that's happening in this picture? But
Yes.
is that a fair thing to say, that it is has a lot of improvements in that since that point? Or I guess my concern is this looks kind of bad at this point, but because pushing forward, sometimes there's improvements that you can get improvements by pushing forward, but if that's not going to be achieved, I would be concerned with moving forward. And I apologize. I didn't go to
So
site.
again, it goes back from a staff perspective, and speaking, I guess, on behalf of the engineering department, we do reviews based on the engineering design drawings. Our criteria is you do analysis of 1 to 100 year plus 20%. If you have to put attenuation ponds or you have to put in other retention mechanisms in place to control so that you're not impacting downstream, which this is an indication of. Obviously, that's what we look at. So we approve based on the engineer design. If there's failures once that's constructed to the design that was approved, then obviously we have to go back and look at, okay, what was approved is not, meeting the intent. How do you wish to address? How are you going to address that? Again, the thing to note is there's two things from a planning perspective, two things that you have to keep in consideration. There's what's being applied for, subdivision of land, create residential lots, which is the intent of the municipal plan, zoning bylaws, and then you design to the subdivision standard. How that gets constructed on the ground and the practices that are used during the construction to control the water, those types of things are two separate sort of sides of the coin, if you will, right? So what's before PAC is, this is what the ask is, is it reasonable? Is it meeting all the plans? How that's implemented obviously becomes an enforcement issue. But again, I'd have to look to see when that date of that photo is and what that was. But, from a construction perspective and from an engineering perspective, one would think that immediately after that, you're putting in mechanisms to make sure there's hail bales and there's some sort of, even if it's temporary control, right, rather than free flow of water. So.
But I think you mentioned about a swale and a pond.
Yeah, so just to add, my belief is that photograph is prior to our infrastructure even being installed.
Okay.
So there's, there's 24-inch pipe going up the hill that's directed away from completely at that time. It's not even able to get to the infrastructure that it's designed to go into.
I understand some of my questions come from seeing many people flood out over the years, so I like to take the steps to make sure that
And yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, to build on Mr. Mason's comment, I think the key part is what was just said at the end, to make sure it doesn't happen again. So if this is a result of infrastructure not being in the ground, the question becomes, how are you going to mitigate this until infrastructure gets in the ground? Right. So if there has to be a temporary holding bond or there has to be something, then that is something I know from an engineering perspective, and speaking on behalf of our engineering manager, that he continually preaches. You have to control stormwater even until you get infrastructure in the ground. Right. So
I apologize for stretching this out, but if I could just add one thing.
Drove through there on Sunday after we had all these trench drains on Saturday. I basically drove across the crossroad. There was no standing water. It was muddy, which is expected, but there was no standing water on that crossroad.
Any further questions from PAC to the applicant? None being, is there anyone in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Please come up, sir, state your name for the record.
Let's try this again. This is 6B, right?
Yeah.
My name's Adam Russell. I live on Follier Drive. My concern, as I brought my concerns forth last year before any of this started, was runoff. Number two, I didn't want a road across from mine. It was supposed to be a future road. That was the first thing that was broken through. I was driving around about a week ago when we were having some heavy rains, and down in the cove, it was brown, totally brown. So Mr. Donovan did fix the infrastructure at the top, but it's still all going to the bottom. It's still going right out to the river. Like the whole cove was brown. It was crazy. So I don't know if things should be fixed before we go further. I mean, I understand from Dwight that this is just to go forward with the proposal for the new subdivision, but I mean, I've had to wash my house, I've had to clean my heat pumps, I've had to fix my driveway because of construction. And I mean, where does it stop? Like, where do we finish before we restart? This is my concern. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come up and state your name for the record, please?
Hi, my name is Derek Tozer, and 22 Follier Drive. I had 4 comments, and now I have 5. First is regarding the width of the lots, the variance on those. So I'm wondering if just because it's a bigger area of a lot size, does that void the fact that the front is not the proper width? You know what I mean? So if it's length by width, just because I have a small little area in the front, but I have a big back, is it totally based on the area of the lot size? Because there's more to a lot than just, and when we're talking variance in this case, we're talking 30 meters, we're talking down to 19.3. And if you look at the very first picture that you have on here, the actual width or they're measuring, I think it's even more than that. This item right here, I don't know where these leaders are going to, but that's somewhere back on the sidelines, but that would not be the corners of the lot. So that would make it even worse, to be honest. And we're talking about 1/3 of a frontage, and I can see the only reason that we're doing that or allowing that is so that we can jam more lots into a certain size space. So I don't think that's right, to be honest. And I mean, a driveway, you have a driveway, you have room for snowbanks, you have garbage cans set out. There's a reason why someone set a minimum width lot. And it says in here that, you know what, it happens all the time. Does it need to happen all the time just because it's a cul-de-sac type of curved, thing? That's my question on that. That's my first item. Number 2 is, what do we call an LPP, land for public purposes? I don't see anywhere written down where a retention pond would be considered a land for public use. And I know that in the proposal that the Parks and Recreations Committee noted that the retention pond should have a dual purpose. I don't know what you could ever do with it to make it into something else other than unsightly retention pond. Might even collect mosquitoes for that matter. Item number 3 is the wells. So it said in here that 6A was a report by Fundy Engineering had went and did that for the first 25 lots plus the remnant. I'm assuming the remnant in that case was just one more lot. So 6A and 6B now, that's 36 lots. But the total project, and I think you commented on it, 59 houses. Wouldn't it seem reasonable that when you did the initial study that you would have looked at the full 59? And maybe they did, but that's not what it says. And I know we're questioning it now, but that should have been like first and foremost, that should have happened along with an environmental assessment or whatever is required normally. So I'm just kind of, I'm not sure about that. And also regarding the wells, a lot of rock and jackhammering that'll be going on. And how are our existing wells protected because of that? I'm not sure of whatever issues they had farther down the street, but that's definitely a concern of mine. That's item number 3. Item number 4, preservation of trees. All the other ones that I've seen, it's not just this contractor, and no offense. First thing to do is clear the whole thing. And we talk about, well, they're going to put a reasonable amount of trees of sufficient maturity. What is that? Is a reasonable amount of trees 2 or 3, or is it 10? And are they this big, or is that a reasonable amount? Like that's something that matters to me, to my backyard. I went and planted a whole bunch of trees right now because I don't want to see a bunch of mess or whatever in my backyard. And this last thing, the rear lot swale, number 5. What does that look like? There's no mention of that on the drawing. There's no mention of that anywhere. I see a swale as some kind of French drain that looks terrible after a short period of time. Is there something not better than that we can do? I'm now to be going right on the line, and I'm not happy with that either. So those are my concerns, my 5 concerns. Lot width size, why are we allowing a variance? They're set that way for a reason. LPP, land for public purposes. A retention pond that's not what a retention pond is. It's not by any stretch in my head. And then the wells, I have an issue with the wells. Why, preservation of trees. We talk about it all the time. I see it in all the literature, but I don't see it happening out in the different subdivisions that are being built. I don't see any new trees being put back. And then the swale on the back, I can only imagine what that might look like. So it needs to be done neat, right? I mean, we keep a neat, all of Follier Drive keeps a really neat street, and we don't want our property value and stuff impacted by that. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Mr. Tozier. Any further? Okay, want to state your name for the record, please?
Thank you. Shara Munn. I live on Follier Drive as well. And I have a lot of the same concerns that you just heard, but I think there's value in at least hearing them restated.
No, we don't. So once they're spoken once, it's new items that we'd like to have addressed. We already have that recorded from Mr. Tozier. Is there any new additional items?
Yeah.
Okay, we can start.
Sure. So I'm still not understanding the reason for needing the variance, apart from greed, I guess, would play into it. But what's the actual reason why it needs to be designed in this way? It's a bit presumptuous. You present a drawing for a subdivision, but in order to be approved, it needs variances. Why not present something that doesn't need variances, that respects the bylaws as they are in place right now? And it's unclear to me, and from the material we received, like, what's the difference? So if this Phase 6B was developed in accordance with the zoning bylaw, how many houses would be in there, right? We don't get to see that proposal. We just see the one that requires variances. So how many more houses are we talking about because of this variance that's sought, and why? Like, I get that there's a need for housing in Quispamsis, but affordable housing is what we're always talking about. This is by no means, you know, anyone's idea of affordable housing in terms of what our community is lacking. So I'm still, you know, looking for a reason to support the variance, and that's, I guess, whether that's to the developer to sort of explain. I don't know what, you know, PAC historically has required or looked for in terms of what amounts to a valid reason to be making variances. Obviously, bylaws are in place for a reason. I did read throughout the report, you know, this is often done in a cul-de-sac. Okay, but that's probably why developers are putting in cul-de-sacs. If the town's just gonna say, oh, that's normal, we vary it for a cul-de-sac. So again, what's the reason? What's the need to jam in this many houses? If anything, this area should be bridging the gap from the very densely, you know, populated Squire Drive area to Fullier and onward, which are more like acre lots, right? So this is sort of that in between. So why, you know, do we have to jam them in right up to the line? It just doesn't, you know, it's not aesthetically pleasing. There's a reason people choose Quispamsis, and we're starting to look more like, you know, Ontario and bigger centers. It seems like the only focus is how many houses can we get, you know, in so many square meters of area. So that's concerning. In terms of the runoff, you know, I heard a member of the committee say went for a drive the next day. I can tell you that during the rainstorm, the ditches are overflowing, not onto the road at least this time, so clearly something's working, but they're still fully brown. Like, all that sediment is still contained in the runoff, so that's not being mitigated. That's a major concern, right? And the cove being brown is a big deal. You know, it should be to people, and maybe we have to get Department of Environment involved. I don't know what's required to get people to be concerned about that, but it shouldn't be brown runoff every storm. In terms of the collection pond, I know that's obviously part of a prior phase. My concern around it is that it's going to satisfy the LPP for this phase. When we first moved in kind of walking the neighborhood and talking to neighbors, we were told there was talk of a playground initially when earlier phases were discussed. So maybe that was in relation to 6A. Not sure, didn't live on the street at the time. But where's the playground? We turned it into a pit, just catches water and lets it go. If anything, that's a safety hazard for kids. I don't know how much water's going in there. It's another concern. But if the credit for Phase 6B is going to be that pond, I have a concern about that. You know, is this developer just making promises up front, saying lovely things like there's going to be a playground, and then it's a bait and switch, and at the end of the day, there's no such thing, and it goes to PAC and it gets, you know, stamped approved and it goes to council? These are legitimate concerns for the neighborhood. There's a ton of kids in this area, and that would be a great LPP, but it's expensive. So I can imagine why, you know, you make that sort of promise or that suggestion up front and then pull it off the table later. The last thing I would say is just water table concern wise. Our home, as well as one of our neighbors at 13 Fullier, our wells already struggle in the summer. So I do have major concerns where this development is not on town water, or it's going to be wells. It's really unclear to me whether the initial report that was done, we're talking about a remnant, you know, what did that contemplate? How many houses was contemplated when they're looking at that remnant? You know, did they actually do like a hydrogeological survey? What did engineering commission? Is it going to be able to support this level of development in Phase 6B? Major concern for us. And then removal of trees was mentioned, but I just guess my question would be, who's policing it? Go for a walk in Phase 6A. There's like no trees left. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience or online? Please come up and state your name for the record, please.
I'm Sandra O'Neill. I'm also on Fullier Drive. Just to sort of add what's been said earlier, there was some comments you had made by Dwight about the water flow and the drainage, and you had not yet been approved by the engineering department. That concerns me, because once it gets underway, how do you stop that, and how does the engineering department go back and not have a stamp on something that's already underway? In addition, just talk about earlier runoff that's caused damages, like severe damages on Follier Drive. I just have a question as to who paid for the repairs of the ditches. Was my understanding that that was a responsibility of the town and not the developer. So if there is more runoff to happen with the clearing of the trees and insufficient drainage, is the town responsible for that? And do we have the funds? Because it's my understanding that from neighbors that the town was, they were told by the town, sorry, we don't have the money. It's not our problem. He's tried to do a few different things. So is the town going to be responsible for any water runoff that goes onto our street where our street's already developed? And is the engineer, have they stamped this whole thing? Thank you.
Thank you. Third and final time, is there anyone else in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? None being, Mr. Donovan, come back up to the podium. Dwight, do you want to address any of the items from either about the Cove Brown or Mr. Tozier or Cheryl? I didn't get your last name, Cheryl? Shara. Shara, okay. Or Sandra O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start with the water study. So when you have a development that exceeds, I'll even back it up further. There was mention of an EIA or an impact environmental assessment. It's not applicable to this development. So those are regulated by the province. Those guidelines are set in place by the province. The trigger is if you are developing a residential development on 30 hectares or more. So if you have 30 hectares, that's going to be on a well-based system, then you have to do an EIA. This entire parcel, the entire parcel prior to the subdividing was less than that, so it wouldn't trigger an EIA. If your proposed subdivision provides for 25 lots or more, then you have to do a comprehensive hydrogeological study. What that involves is basically, it's done in accordance with the regulations of the province, the Clean Water Act. You sink 2 wells. One is your drawdown well, one is your monitoring well. You pump it at a specific rate in accordance with the regulation for a period of 24 hours. You see what the drawdown is and how long it takes for that to rebound. And you look at if there's interconnectivity between the wells. So as indicated in my staff report, the comprehensive study was done. It indicated there was sufficient water of quality and quantity to support the level of development. In my staff report, I had indicated that it did mention that it was for the proposed development under 6A plus the remnant. That is why I've noted in my staff report to PAC, I'm seeking clarification on what that remnant is. Was it the whole 59 or 60 lots that was considered, or to what extent? Looking for that letter or that confirmation as to what was meant by what the remnant, and then obviously once I get that confirmation, then I'll look at, okay, what are the next step? Do we have to look at an abbreviated, or where does that go? In terms of the variances, so in terms of a lot, the bylaw provides a minimum standard or minimum set of dimensions and width and those types of things. But what also we look at is if there's a narrowing or changing of the lot, does the lot provide you with sufficient area whereby you can place a house or you can develop that lot and still meet the setbacks? What the dimensions are on that particular drawing is the way the lot width is measured is you go whatever the setback is for the house in that particular development. So the minimum setback is 7.5 meters. You come back 7.5 meters, and then you determine what the lot width is at that setback level, right? Then you look at, is there sufficient room to support a home if it was built so that you would have 3 meters on each side, right? In this particular case, yes, it narrows in the front, but the actual lot depth is in excess of that 38 meters, and the area is in excess of 1,140. So when you look at the lot depth, you look at the lot area, they're in excess. Therefore, the ask of PAC is it is reasonable to believe that this lot, even though it's narrow at the front, does provide sufficient room to support a single-family, single detached house with your typical amenities or use of the lot. That's the rationale, okay? What were some of the other ones? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
Rear lot swale.
The rear lot swale, I'd have to go back to look at the engineering design drawings again. I can chat with our engineering department. If there's a rear lot swale, what we normally look for is that to be located, you know, somewhere on that property, not necessarily up to the property line. However, if it's a rear lot swale for the actual conveyance of water, then we would be looking for at least some sort of local government services easement, because our concern with putting in rear lot swales is who maintains them. If it is an integral part of your stormwater management plan, and as a property owner, let's say I was living there and I'm responsible for maintaining my portion so that all the water upstream, it makes its way all the way down, we always look for local government services easements, because that means that the municipality has a right to go in to maintain these swales to make sure they're functioning if they're an integral part of your stormwater management plan. We've seen them in the past where those swales are simply grass, you know, little channels, if you will, in the properties, and the water's collected and they come to the front. So they actually go into the street ditches or they go into catch basins, and it's part of the problem. So I would be looking for clarification on that. Does that require local government services easement? What that looks like? Okay, so that's something that we would look at through the engineering design process. In terms of water runoff, again, sediment erosion control, we ask for measures to be put in place. If those things are not working accordingly, then it's the responsibility of the developer, obviously, to make sure they are. If there are concerns about sediment getting into the water courses, Means Cove, then that is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Environment. They look after that is their jurisdiction. LPP? Land for public purposes. So land for public purposes, there's a policy, and it's also in the subdivision bylaw that indicates that land can be taken for the purposes of facilities as it relates to stormwater management. They can be taken for facilities that would be under town ownership, if you will. And when we say dual purpose, we do have land for public purposes in the municipality that have a stormwater retention pond, as well as it integrates a walking trail, or it integrates just green space. We can revisit, again, as I mentioned previously, this plan comes to PAC. PAC looks at the land for public purposes. They can make recommendations to me as a development officer. I would take that to council. It is ultimately council who makes the final decision on whether the land for public purposes as proposed is accepted. Again, if there's PAC feels there's more clarification required in terms of what that land for public purposes will be, and if there's clarification required in terms of, yeah, we'd like to see a playground, then that is something that can be recommended to me, where I can communicate with the developer, and then prior to going to council, we can have that sort of ironed out. But there are opportunities. So when we say dual purpose, it can be just green space, it can incorporate a stormwater retention pond, and it can incorporate other things. So you could incorporate some level of a playground. You could incorporate just simply, you know, trails, walking trails, if they're larger retention ponds. We do have them in the municipality. Okay. The intent of a retention pond is water comes in, it's held for a period of 24, 36 hours, then it's drained out. Normally these things are, you know, when they're functioning properly, are supposed to be dry within that period. So they're not, they're more of a detention versus a retention pond. Where a retention pond is continuously holding water.
One other item there, Dwight, was, the other item was the preservation of trees. What is a reasonable amount of trees? How do we come up with a number?
The way it's worded, that is, what's in the staff report is actually from the subdivision bylaw, and that is the determination of council in terms of what is reasonable and mature, and that is the way it's worded. The intent, as is indicated in the zoning bylaw and in the subdivision bylaw, is to actually make sure that what's cut is only necessary to build the road and put in the necessary infrastructure. Unfortunately, we do have in cases where people just go in and they just clear cut. That is something that we're actively trying to address. In 2023, we implemented a development permit process. Prior to that, a developer could go in and just start the work. There's a development permit process that is required, and part of that development process right now is you have to submit a plan that says, what are you cutting? Okay. And we review that, and they're supposed to stay with that plan. If they fail, then we have the provisions in the bylaw that basically say we can revoke the permit and you're cease and desist until that's addressed. So in terms of the reasonableness of trees and what that looks like, that is obviously a decision of council as part of the Sept program, Sept process. As we looked at or talked about earlier, under phase 6, there was clear cutting that happened, and council requested there would be a tree remediation plan, which requires the developer to plant trees. Part of that plan was to actually identify what those trees are of that maturity. That was part of that Fernwood phase 6 approval. So that's where that comes from. Again, it's in most cases, if it's a restoration or remedy plan, then you have to present what you're proposing. The intent is to restrict cutting to basically the right of way, to get the street in, the infrastructure in. The lots where they sit in terms of clearing for homes, that is supposed to fall under the building permit process as well. There is no, and I'll just add by the caveat, there is no requirement in our zoning bylaw to maintain a buffer between residential properties.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
I think there's a couple other questions.
Because-
One talked about who, oh, sorry, Dwight, I interrupted.
Go
you.
ahead.
Oh, who pays for repairs of ditches? Obviously, that's the town, if it's town property.
There is a caveat in the development agreement, in all the development agreements, that says that if in the case of emergency repairs, so if in the case of emergency repairs, the town has to go in. Now, again, what that is, if you get into significant washing of ditches, there's culverts that are destroyed, there's impacts the property outside of the street right of way, then there is a caveat in all development agreements that says the town has the right to charge the cost of those repairs to the developer. So the town has the right to go in to take action to address emergency situations, whatever the cost is. That can be materials, time, labor, all of that can be charged back to the developer. So again, in this particular case, I'd have to go back to see what was discussed in the particulars of it, but I know from a development agreement perspective, that is the provision of the development agreement.
Okay.
And council has the right, staff has the right to act on that, obviously, true direction of council to reclaim on emergency repairs.
And I think one other question was water flow. Once the project starts, how does this get approved? But I believe that's all approved prior to the project starting. Stamp set of drawings, everything, stormwater management gets approved prior to the project starting.
In the best case scenario, and the way the flow is to be is tentative plan gets approved, engineering design drawings happen, engineering drawings come to the town approves them, construction starts. There are, it does happen where construction starts prior to approval of the plan, but again, you're at the risk of approval not being granted. You have infrastructure in the ground. If it doesn't meet the specs, if it has to be changed, all of those things are on the developer. The town is of no obligation to accept infrastructure in the ground until it actually meets the standards of the subdivision bylaw and whatever the municipal specs are for the particular infrastructure. And all that has to be clearly indicated to council prior to acceptance of the infrastructure. So if you have deficient infrastructure, then it's the developer who bears the cost to replace it, to bring it up to where it needs to be. So there is a risk of jumping ahead and doing the work outside of the approvals of the municipality.
Thank you very much, Dwight. I think you've answered the questions. Brent?
There's just one other comment about the difference in lot sizes versus Foyer and Pioneer Avenue. I'm assuming Foyer is on private septic and Pioneer is municipal services?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Preston. So Foyer is serviced by on-site sewage disposal systems. They're 1 acre lots for that reason. However, it is my understanding that there is pipes in the ground, I believe, in Foyer. That was done during prior to amalgamation with the vision that at some point in time there would be sanitary sewer in that particular area. So there was intent at that point in time for the sewer to be in that particular area, but as we sit today, Foyer is serviced by on-site wells and on-site sewage. So that's the difference. Right? And our bylaws our subdivision bylaws and our municipal plan and our zoning bylaws do not provide for transition areas. We basically look at what is the zoning. The zoning of this particular development, abutting Fuller, is the same zone. It's R1. So in that particular case, we look at the lot size. If there wasn't an opportunity, so in an R1 zone, if there wasn't an opportunity to provide municipal sewer and it had to be on-site septic, therefore you would default to the requirements of the province, which is 1 acre. But in this particular case, it can be serviced by municipal sewer, therefore you can increase your density based on the provisions of the bylaw.
Thanks again, Dwight. Mr. Donovan, you would have heard all the comments from public, responses from town staff. Anything you'd like to add or discuss?
I'm happy to answer any further questions, but Dwight did a really good job.
Okay. Members of PAC have any further questions? Remember, a PAC, like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions, please. Don't forget, it's a tentative plan. Members of PAC have any further questions before someone puts a motion for or against? Brent?
Motion, approval, approval of the Country View Estates Phase 6B tentative plan, and PAC recommend acceptance of the street layout and design for Phase 6B, the use of the LLP credit from Phase 6B to satisfy the requirements of Phase B, and that LPP shown on Pioneer Avenue in 6B is to be used for community use. The citizens did recommend a playground, so let's put that in as a recommendation. And the granting of lot width variances for lots 43 to 46. And Dwight, I believe there was a variance on the width of the street also, was there not? Yeah, and the 4-meter variance on the streets. And the developer's conditions of approval as outlined in the recommendation.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a correction. So it's the use of the LPP credit for from 6A for the requirements of 6B. It's 6B. That's what happens when you write these reports and you get phone calls and emails.
Okay, Brent?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Basically, the land or the LPP shown on the plan in this, whatever it was, that's the LPP we're talking about, correct?
So it's the LPP that was created with Phase 6A. There's a credit, and that credit being used towards the requirements of 6B.
Right. With the recommendation based on the citizens that it be used for playground.
PAC has the authority to build on that recommendation, so the recommendation could be to use a credit plus, considering whatever that may be prior to council's end.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder on that?
I'll second it. But
Kendall?
I understood that there was a stormwater pond on the LPP. Am I wrong there?
No, there's an LPP above, isn't there?
Okay.
There is to be a stormwater pond on that LPP, but the conversation has been around whether it can be dual purpose. Can you add to it? What can that look like? Can the size of the pond be reduced? If the PAC is recommending to be considered some other facility in there, we need to go back to first of all, that would be taken back to community services. And then community services would provide direction to the development officer and council whether they wish to support some sort of other facility in that particular area.
I support the playground. I do also support using it for a stormwater detention pond to ensure communities prepared for future storm events. That's why I second that.
Thank you. Any debate on that motion? Can we have a vote, please? That motion's carried 3-1. Mr. Donovan, you'll have your recommendation in the mail for the approval of the tentative plan. Please work with town, have all necessary paperwork document in place. And please work with the neighbors in your area where you're working. You've been developing in this town for many years, and I encourage you to work with the neighbors so everyone can work together and have a happy place in town of Quispamsis.
Thank you.
That being, we'll move on to item 8, information items for discussion. None being, we'll move on to item 9. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Mark?
So moved.
Can I have a seconder on that, please? Brenda?
I'll do that. Second it.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned for Tuesday, September 10th. Thank you very much.